Sometimes the hardest relationships aren't the ones we enter blindly. They're the ones we enter while loving Jesus, while wanting to do the right thing, while hoping this one will finally be the answer. And then God speaks, not to shame you, but to protect you. Today's episode is for the woman who feels like so much of her life is good, yet something still feels off. The one who wrestles with desire, waiting, and obedience, and learning that alignment often requires letting go. Welcome back to the It's Your Story to Tell podcast. I'm your host, Megan Babcock, and today I'm joined by Kim Wright. She is a Jesus-loving nurse and emerging coach who has walked through a journey of obedience, identity, and realignment. I'm so excited for our conversation because there are so many similarities that we're going to get to talk about between some of the things Kim and I have walked through in our life, in our faith. And I'm just so excited to have you here, Kim, to share this space and tell your story. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are you tired of repeating the same patterns, feeling stuck in your story, and wondering if real change is even possible? In my book, Unstuck, Break Free from What's Holding You Back and Create a Life You Love, I walk you through the path from survival to transformation, blending faith, neuroscience, and soul deep healing. This book, it's not just words on a page. It's a companion for your journey. Whether you've experienced trauma or just feel lost in the noise of life, Unstuck will meet you there with truth, compassion, and tools that actually work. It's time to stop surviving and start living your story with purpose. Grab your copy today on Amazon. Well, here on the It's Your Story to Tell podcast, we kind of jump in deep and we want our audience to get to know you. And so if you would just start out telling us a little bit about your story, maybe from that place when life looked mostly good from the outside, but you were carrying a deep desire for marriage, and take us kind of through the journey to even the breaking point for you and how you walked through that.
Okay. Well, I had grown up in church, and the church that I was going to was very big on for marriage and being worthy for marriage. And I think I took that message and took it to the extreme because I tied my value and my worth to being married. And so it made me hyper focus on getting married. And I had been single for a long time. I had my son from a previous marriage that didn't work out. So I had been single for a long time, and I just really wanted to feel valued. I wanted to feel worthy. I wanted to feel like I was wife material. And as a single person, I didn't feel that way. Um, there came a time in my life where I got really sick. Yeah, I got really sick, and it kind of made me hunger even more for somebody in my life because I could have died, and I didn't want my life and my story to just be, to end there. So I ended up meeting a person. Well, I healed, I got better, and I ended up meeting a person at the time that I was getting better. So I had like a pretty grim outlook, you know, and I was just happy to be out, happy to be alive. And so when I met this person, it was very exciting. We went out a lot. We had a lot of the same like social interests, and it was just very exciting. So it brought like a big excitement to my life, but there was always something inside of me that made me uncomfortable with the relationship. And there was an age difference. There was a big age difference. I'm going to say that, and be honest. And there were so many differences. We weren't really on the same page, but I overlooked those things, kept making excuses for them, and kept saying, it's okay. It's going to be okay. That'll be fine. That really doesn't matter. What matters is, we love each other. What matters is we are having a great time. I focused on that and I kept pushing down the nudges in my spirit that was saying, hey, listen, maybe you shouldn't go so deep with this person. But like I said, I had been single for close to 20 years, single and not really dating, or dating here and there, not really any relationship working out. And I just felt like I had no value without being somebody's wife. So, I just kind of went with that. I went with that and I continued dating this person. And we sh- he shared a lot of my highs. Like once I healed and once I got well, I was finishing my degree, my bachelor's degree, and that whole congratulations piece, he shared that with me. So a lot of life events he was sharing with me. I just took that. I was riding on that, riding on all the highs. And like I said, just pushing away all of the red flags and the urges inside me that was saying, you know, don't go any further. I didn't listen to that. Yeah.
You're not alone in that. I think it's a very common experience because when we have a really strong desire for something, we can try to make the situation that we're in look like that. And I also think that when you go through something really hard and you are at a very vulnerable place, like you said, where oh my goodness, I could have died from this. I really value marriage and this relationship. And you take on a different perspective when you've been so sick and faced with death, where you're thinking, I don't know how much more time I have. So maybe I can't wait for the right person. Maybe this person can become the right person. They have all of these good things. I know in my own life I grew up valuing marriage and family and seeing in the church the importance of that. And I experienced a really hard thing that made me believe it wasn't really marriage material. And so then I didn't get into healthy relationships because I had this belief, but yet it was still the desire of my heart. There's just this conflict that's going back and forth. It's pretty exhausting. At least I remember for me, I was just overwhelmed by navigating it. And a lot of times you're like, it's easier to give in to, well, I'll make the best of this situation because I'm probably never going to have what I dreamed of.
Exactly. That's exactly how I felt. I didn't feel worthy enough. Really the first person who really paid that type of attention to me and made me feel special. I thought, oh, well, he must be the one. He must love me because he makes me feel so good. And I didn't want to let it go. I was afraid to let that go. I think that's why I didn't let it go, because I'm telling you, I had the fear inside me so often, like, this is not, don't continue with this, like you're taking it too far. But I kept just pushing that aside because I'm saying, well, no, who else is there? There's nobody else knocking down my door. There's nobody else coming to me, maybe because I'm not worthy enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not this enough, whatever, so many things. And I'm looking at this person, this relationship that I'm in, and I'm saying, why would I throw this away? Like, this is right here. I'm enjoying this, so I'm going to hold on to it. But there did come a point where I just could not deny that I had to let the relationship go. It was so clear to me. I think around 2016, it became very clear. Do not go any further. This is not the person for you. This person is not going where you're going. And that's what I felt inside. But I remember asking myself, like, well, where am I going? Again, because I had no worth, I had no value, so where was I going? I wasn't going anywhere. But I said, you know what? I think I better follow that. I better follow that. And I broke off the relationship. And when I broke it off, I really felt like I like springboarded in life. Like I was able to accomplish some things that I was really trying to accomplish during the relationship, but I just couldn't get it off the ground. So when I broke that off, all of a sudden, like some things just broke open and I was like, wow. And it brought me back to the sense that I had, like, he's not going where you're going. I guess that was really something. But in my eyes, I had a list, you write down a list when you're younger. I want this, I want that, I want this. And from my list, I had everything except for marriage. I had everything except for a husband. So about 3 years later, after I had broken the relationship off, I sought him out because I knew he was someone who was willing to go all the way, like even to marriage, and I hadn't met anybody else. So I decided to go back and basically like rekindle that relationship, and then we ended up married. We did get married, but it was the worst thing that happened to me so far in life. I mean, it really didn't. Even the week of our marriage ceremony, I had such strong feelings like, I don't think I should do this. But at that time, I didn't want to be embarrassed, because literally was the week of, everything was planned, invitations, everybody's coming. And I didn't want to be embarrassed. And I didn't want to embarrass him, his family was coming. And I said, okay. I remember saying, well, I'll go through with the ceremony, but then I won't sign this this license. I mean, I was just trying all kinds of ways to back out of it, to save face, to save that picture, that perfect picture, because that's what I was shooting for, the perfect picture. And yeah, I realized later that throughout life, not only at this time, but I've tried to and I've manipulated relationships and situations, for in my good or for my favor. And that's what I was trying to do at that time. I was definitely trying to manipulate a relationship and manipulate him and then manipulate my family and friends by going through the ceremony, appearing like we're married, but not really being married. But I ended up signing the certificate and we were really married. And I just tried to make the best of it from there,
Mm.
but I couldn't. I just could not. It wasn't working.
Well, I first want to commend you in your bravery of being able to say your part. That is really hard to say. I manipulated something and I was trying to work these things for my good. I have a very similar story to that. I had learned to try to keep everyone happy and keep the peace, and what are all of these different things going to mean to every person, and trying to figure out how to get my needs met and avoid the disappointment of people, even though it never really worked. If I'm honest, it was like I was actually creating more pain, more trauma, more disappointment than if I had listened to the warnings that were being given to me and face that discomfort head on. And if I had been obedient and if I had been curious about, okay, help me understand, what are these red flags? What am I sensing? And allowed myself to have space for them. But when you are trying to make something look perfect, you can't really pay attention to those things because they're the very things that you're trying to avoid.
Right.
And it's interesting how the very thing we want, the actions we're taking are getting us more of the things we don't want. And that is just the enemy. He does not want us to have clarity about things. He doesn't want us to understand what's the reality of things. Wants us to continually live in a lie of unworthiness and not being good enough. Like if you go back to the Garden of Eden, when he's talking to Eve, what is he doing? He's making her feel like you could be more. You could be like God when you are already created in God's image, but he's making you feel less than, dissatisfied, thinking that you're missing out on something. So then you start trying to figure out how to survive in this experience. And so the things that you're sharing are so common, but not a lot of people are willing to say those things out loud. I spent a long time being a victim of all of these different things because it was easier for me to be a victim of it, then recognize that I'm participating in it. In fact, I am choosing what's happening in my life. I don't know if that resonates with you or not.
Exactly. I love that you said choosing. I love that you said choosing because I didn't know I had options. I don't know if that makes sense. I didn't feel like I had options. No, I just didn't. I just didn't feel like I had options. I felt like I had to grab them. I had to take the bull by the horns. I was just always in a go mode, always in a strive mode, always in a get more, gain more. But it was really when I took a second to really look back, it was really like just hiding myself. There were things that were deep inside of me that I really didn't want to face. I didn't know how to face. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know who to talk about it to. I was embarrassed. I was shamed. All the things. If I did this, if I got that, if I did that, if I looked like this, if I tried to do that. But all of those things were really trying to hide how I felt about myself on the inside. But it was the way I felt about myself on the inside that kept making me make these poor decisions.
Yeah.
It was a vicious cycle. I felt horrible. I make a poor decision, and the poor decision made me feel more horrible. I couldn't get my spouse on board with my plan. He was independent, and I credit that. It's good for him. I guess he was willing to go along, to, get married. But after a while, he was like, no. I think he saw that I was trying to manipulate him. I can now appreciate the fact that he like stood his ground. He was like, I'm not acting like this. I'm not doing that. You want me to do the. And I'm like, "Well, why? Why won't you do that?" But it just wasn't working. It really just wasn't working, and I didn't even remember when years ago when the thought came to me, like, "He's not going where you're going." I was so focused on fixing it, making it better, like, making it appear away that I had totally forgot about that, right? Until one day it just came back to me. I was so frustrated with my job, and this was right after the COVID pandemic. I just was like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. And I was angry and frustrated with God. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. What is my purpose? Like, I'm standing there and it just came to me. It's like, you laid down your purpose. You left it.
Wow.
And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And then it came back to me like this, you got this person in your life. He's not supposed to be here. Like he could be holding up your purpose. You're out of order. You're out of order. You're being disobedient. And how in the world can you get to where I want you to be? And you got all this going on. Like you can't go there with this. And I never want to disappoint God, right? And I'm like, but that was the only thing that made me say, all right, well, I guess I gotta let this go. I mean, all of the disappointment, all of the everything about the relationship that I had gone through, none of that made me want to let it go because I wanted the picture. I wanted the life. I wanted to be a wife. I was trying to make myself valuable. Nothing that happened in the marriage made me say, okay, it's over, it's quits, even down to my physical health. I began to get really sick, right, from stress related illnesses. It's crazy. Like I had never had a panic attack ever before in my life. And if you had asked me, I would never say that, oh, I'm an anxious person or anything like that. But the stress of the relationship and the stress of the job that I was in at the time, it was too much to bear. It started really coming out physically and mentally. Physically, I was always tired, very tired all the time for no reason. I'd get up in the morning after, a night's sleep and I'd be exhausted. After my shower, I get dressed and I'm like, oh my God, I'm tired. I started having like full body, like hives just out of the blue. I'm like, why am I breaking out in hives? What did I eat? What did I do? Just walking it back, trying to find out what's the source of this. Nothing. Like I go to the doctor. She's like, Kim, Like, your lab work is fine, everything's fine. And it wasn't until I had had my third panic attack that I realized it was a panic attack. I thought I
Mm.
was having a heart attack, and I drove myself to the ER, and they did all the things. I'm looking at the EKG because I want to read it. It's normal sinus. I'm like, no way. I told the lady, I'm like, no way. No way is normal sinus. She was like, oh, it's normal sinus. My heart rate was like 70 something, but my blood pressure was a little high. I says, no. So she was like, oh, I'll send you back to the doctor anyway. He'll check you out. I'm like, okay. So maybe like 10 minutes later, I started to feel the palpitations again. And I'm like breathing heavy. I'm like, I can't breathe. And I said, take it again. Take the EKG again. Take it now. Like, it's happening now. She took it again. Normal sinus. I'm like, no way. I'm having a heart attack. She says, no, you're not. So doctor saw me. I'm telling them what lab work and everything to run. I'm like, can you run it stat? All these things. You just saw me. And so they released me and I'm driving home and that's when it hit. Kim, it was a panic attack. And so from there, within a couple of days, I had gotten a mental health therapist and I started talking to her and having some sessions. And after a couple of weeks, she told me, she says, Kim, ultimately, it's about your decision, your choice. So when you said choice earlier, I was like, oh my gosh, it boiled down to that. But I was still struggling with letting the marriage go because then my concern was, well, I don't want to get divorced. God doesn't want me to get divorced. Was already disobedient with that. Now I'm about to get the divorce. And she says, listen, ultimately, it comes down to choice. And I said, what do you mean? It comes down to choice. She says, Kim, and we've had these sessions and you're making a decision one way or the other. She said, so it comes down to your choice. And I said, why would I choose to hurt myself? So that was really the catalyst with me saying, okay, combined with like the Lord telling me, you're not in the right place. You're being disobedient. I said, okay. That was the step that I took to break the relationship. It wasn't easy.
Sure.
It was very hard. Yeah. It was a very hard process. But I mean, from there, once I made that decision, not even separated physically yet, but the decision, instantly, I felt a little relief because I knew, all right, I'm walking in the right direction.
A couple things as we're kind of closing up here, and we'll go into the second part where we're going to share a little bit about that healing journey and then how you are using that and living out your calling right now and that purpose God has reignited in your story. I remember the moment that I was so mad and angry with God, and I finally was just honest and shared my emotions. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm so disrespectful. I can't believe I've just laid it out on him. And God was so kind and gentle in helping me to see the way I was looking at the situation, the choices that I was making were not in alignment and were disobedient. And much like you, I was fighting for a very unhealthy marriage. And God was showing me that I was trying to force my will on someone else. And he's like, that's abuse. You're sitting here saying this person's unhealthy and abusive towards you because it looks maybe outwardly easier to classify as that. But what you're doing, manipulation, being a people pleaser, being dishonest about what the reality of your life is also not healthy. It's not fair to the other person. And so being able to see that what I was doing allowed me then to see that I had a choice. Do I continue down this path? And much like you, I had gotten into a relationship after my first divorce where I felt even worse about who I was and outside of God's will, got into a relationship, pregnant outside of marriage. And it was like, well, I've got to make this right. I'm going to make this right. And what God showed me is you can't make sin right. Sin is sin. You sinned, and God can redeem your sins. He could redeem a relationship or a marriage, but it takes two people to come into agreement that that is what they want. Otherwise, you can't move forward. You're still unequally yoked, which is not what he has for you, right? When he started to show me how I was interpreting what I thought was his will and what I needed to do, which wasn't actually what he was asking me to do, I was able to move forward and take those steps. Thank you so much for walking us through that, and how not only was it affecting your marriage, but it was affecting your health. Everything gets impacted when we're going through these hard periods where we step out of alignment. Let's come back in part 2 and talk about how you began walking in greater alignment in your life.